So Eva has a question.
So I started the pleasure course like 5 days ago. And when I was doing a practice, I remember that they say that like the women's active part is the chest and the heart, and then for the guys it's more the the genitals. So I was curious to know a little bit more about this, why this happens, and yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this.
Um, well, I don't say that, right? So I don't know where you heard that. I never talk about women's chest being active while men's chests are, yeah, men's genitals are more active. So I don't know who told you this, but I can speak about that because I don't actually believe that. You know, th- that's a roundabout neo-tantric way of saying that women's heart is more open while men's genitals are more open. But I think that's a very reductionistic view of human sexuality and also, you know, men and women in general, because it's not true that men only function with the genitals and women only you know, like function with the breasts and the heart and say, you know, like that. So I don't know where you read it, but certainly not in my pleasure course because
No,
I,
no, no, no.
okay, good.
It was not in your lecture course. No, I heard this a few years ago and I didn't understand the concept. So that's what I'm asking, you know,
Yeah.
if that is true or not.
I think, you know, I think it's a very reductionistic view that I have heard before where it said that women open the heart first and then their body, like the genitals open. That's true enough in the sense that most women need to be emotionally engaged with, you know, the person that they're sexual with, but we also know that that's not all the way true because otherwise there wouldn't be so many people hooking up on Tinder and things like that. So I think there is a kernel there that is taken into something that then makes men and women once again, you know, so different. I do think that, you know, proper examination of all the different areas in the body is very useful. So meaning often it's said that there is kind of your thinking doing area, which is your head and brain and mouth and eyes, and then there's your feeling emotional heart area, which is often described as a horizontal area because it kind of goes this way and through the hands, and we certainly work with that. And then there's the doing area, which is your belly, your solar plexus, your genitals. And I think that's true for men and women alike. And I think probably the best way to go is find out what's what and where are you weak and where are you strong and how can you work with it. And then take it from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gabriela has a question.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Doing okay. Feeling a little bit apprehensive about, and maybe I shouldn't even be thinking about this, but what lies on the other side, right? As at least here in London, the weather is gorgeous. People are wanting, you feel that energy of people just wanting to get out of here, wanting to get this over with. And I speak to quite a few people, some of them my students, who are a bit apprehensive about what's going to happen if the restrictions are eased too much or not enough. And my own apprehension is, yeah, I've been looking so forward for it to be over. And I think, oh, what are the first people I'm going to see and hug? And I can't wait to regroup with my community. But then I think, oh, wait, you know, it's not going to be that soon. It's not going to be that easy, right? There are going to be, I feel, it seems like still social distancing measures that are going to be applied. There will still be this distance that we have to apply between ourselves and the world around us, even though we're out in the world. And that makes me feel a little bit, uneasy, because just because of putting up those walls, just because we're putting up those barriers, right? And it's still going to be there, this distance that we have to keep from people when we so long for connection. And I don't know if that makes sense, but just how to deal with it, how to deal with that sort of in between, this sort of liminal space when we do. I think as of next week here, at least in London, you're seeing some shops open again, but I've never worn a face mask. I think I'm going to have to wear one, even though I don't want to wear one. How do you just deal with sort of in between state of, being allowed to being set free, but not completely, and just with the contraction that brings up. I mean, just thinking about it makes me feel very uneasy and quite sad, right?
Yeah.
And for me, especially, I feel, I've done so much work, and a lot of the work I've done with you to, break down a lot of those own personal barriers I have in terms of connecting with others. And I feel, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put them back up again, or how do I put them halfway up, halfway down? And it's something that I'm thinking about. It's hard for me to figure out how to be in the world in this in between state of connecting but not totally connecting.
Yeah.
And wanting to connect.
Yes. Well, I think what you're saying there is something that I'm certainly contemplating, right, myself, and I think everybody does to a certain degree. And there's layers to it, right? And I find it often helpful to kind of look at different, like separate things out. So there is, let's call it personal, societal or community, and global, or however you would want to slice it, right? So on a global level, of course, we don't know anything really. I mean, it's shown over and over and over that there's new research coming out. They don't really know, are we going to be immune or not? There's no real data out there. So depending on what political, affiliation or what news outlet you're looking at, you're getting radically different information. Some countries deal with it one way and some the other. So there's really no knowing what is the right course of action, right? And there's no knowing what the cost of certain things will be. So I think when you look at it from a global level, there isn't much you can predict or anticipate or plan on. And that is a very unpleasant and uncomfortable place, because we're used to having some kind of predictive quality to our interaction with the world, right? And usually when you go to the US, you know what to expect, or to England or whatever, and now you don't. And now you also can't get proper information, because it's all, there's agendas, of course. And that's how, that falls into the realm of dealing with uncertainty, which I think Steve has talked about before, and I'm sure probably will again. And, the kind of free fall of not knowing what's up and down. Then you can look at your, let's say, community and the people around you and your city and your, direct environment. And you can make your own assessment based on the personal information that you have, right? And that's different for each person. I know people who have family and relatives and close friends who have died or gotten very sick. I know people who have gotten very sick. I know people who, it's like nothing ever happened. So you can kind of look at your environment and the environment you are in and your social circle, and make determinations as to what your social circle is most likely going to want to do, right? And is going to expect that will happen. And, that's very different from person to person. Somewhere here in my neighborhood, there's people who have, just loud parties every night. And clearly there's lots and lots and lots of people on these parties, because you can hear, you know, screaming and shouting and drinking and partying every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So clearly their social circle has a very different experience and expectation as, let's say, my social circle. So there's that, and that's your personal determination within your social circle. Is your need to be included and your need to be connected such that you want to engage with that? And then there's the personal thing, and the personal thing is your personal health status, your, let's say, relational status within your household, if you are by yourself, haven't seen somebody for 8 weeks, or if you're living with somebody who you are really, really sick of by now, or somewhere in between, right? So there's that, there's your personal health, as in, have you gotten sick? Are you vulnerable? Do you have people around you that are really vulnerable? You know, those kind of things. And then the one thing that you can, in fact, to a certain degree, determine, and that's really the only thing you can determine to a certain degree, is how much risk are you willing to take, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable based on your personal circumstances, right? And so that's where things like, will you wear a mask, right? I've started wearing masks on flights to Australia quite a while back, because I would always get sick on the way to Australia because it's such a long flight. And so I found back then that if I would wear a mask, even though it looked a bit funny on the plane, right? But that I actually could travel with very little of the effects that I usually would have on my respiratory system. So I'm all for wearing a mask, even in a non-pandemic situation when I get on a plane, and I do and did before. Yeah. So those are things to figure out, right? Is your vanity overriding your need for safety? Is your need for safety so extreme that you can't leave the house, and so on and so on? So those are the only determinations you can make, and that has to do with your own risk assessment and the people around you. So that's, I think, where I'm going to leave it. I'm sure Steve has some things to add to that, and then we'll see if you have questions.
Yeah, Michaela, I think gave you very practical advice, so I can give you the impractical perspective. I'm reminded of the Bible, a couple of verses in the Bible that says, where Jesus is sort of talking to his disciples, and he says, who by worrying can add a single day to his life, or who by worrying can add a single hour to his life? It's not to say that there aren't, bad things that could happen. It's an attitudinal thing. And then he says, I just brought it up actually, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. And he goes on to say, is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And then he says, can any of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. And he says, if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you? And therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I'm not suggesting you should convert to Christianity. I'm not saying that. It's an attitudinal thing. I think we can draw several layers of meaning out of that. But one of the layers of meaning that I find useful is that tomorrow hasn't happened yet. And yes, of course, it's important to think ahead and to plan ahead and to try to position yourself optimally for future circumstances. That's part of what it means to be a human being, is to look to the past so we can learn things, and look to the future so we can try to get the jump on what's going to happen next. That's a mechanism. But in addition to that, casting forward and casting back, today is still occurring. And there's something, I think, to be said in the midst of the uncertainty. It does not get rid of the uncertainty to try to enjoy or tend to what can be done now. So what can you do today? What is a useful thing you can do today, even in some small way, I think is very good. And also there, Jesus, not that I'm presuming to know what he meant, but this is just sort of how it strikes me, right? But Jesus is using all these nature analogies to try to get his point across, talking about, look at the flowers in the field, look at the birds in the sky and things like that. And I think actually nature is a great object of meditation or consideration with these sorts of things. When one is worried about face masks and socializing and things of that sort, to look out at nature and see how nature is in constant relationship with itself, interacting with itself, the birds touching the branches, the wind rustling the trees and the grass, the rain falling on the ground. There is an awful lot of correct order, normality going along at the realm of nature. And that can be, I think, quite a solace to see that the grass is growing despite a pandemic lockdown. The wind is blowing, even though the wind is blowing as it usually does, unperturbed by you having to put on a face mask. My point being, there are other things happening than your perspective. There are other things happening than your difficulties. That doesn't neutralize your difficulties, but when you anchor out like that, or at least broaden your perspective to take in those other perspectives, it can be have a cooling effect to the suffering, to the feeling of distress, to widen beyond yourself in that way. And I think that's one of the reasons. And I can imagine in that sermon, Jesus is there, they're like outside somewhere, and Jesus is pointing at the birds, look at the birds, and everyone looks at the birds and they start to sort of get informed by the birds. Look at the flowers, they look at the flowers and they start to kind of like get taught by the flowers. So I think it's possible to, in a strange sort of way, be taught by taking these broader perspectives and to be informed in that way. So that's just another perspective that's on the whole thing. Usually I talk about simmering in uncertainty like a sausage in the pan, which is what I think you'd be expecting me to say, which is also fine. But I've said that in a lot of the other S&M conversations, so I thought I'd take a slightly different tack. But you could always, of course, also simmer like a sausage in a pan. And if you don't know what I mean by that, you have now incentive to watch the previous S&M conversations we've been doing to find out, what is this simmering like a sausage in a pan business? What is the mantra of don't know, don't know? Well, you can go back and find out.
No, I like this broader perspective that you're offering right now. I've heard you, and I have considered the sausage in the pan sizzling before, and I think I'm usually pretty good with that. I think I have been, but yeah, I think I needed something else to anchor on, and so that's very beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
As well as the practical advice. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We'll mute you. Joyce.
Say right now I feel a little bit overloaded with words. I think that's a general state I'm in. I feel I'm in a very different place than most people here because my country is pretty open now. So I already had to deal with how do part of my time I'm in the classroom back with the students now. So I had to like readjust to be around people. So I generally feel overwhelmed a little bit. I have an old question that I wanted to ask. And I think it's similar to the overload because I'm seeing right now, I feel really good. I do it. My favorite exercise of yours right now is just the one with relaxing the back. So just laying down, relaxing. And my whole body is just so pleasurable every time I do it. It's amazing. And I've just done that for a few hours today in the sun. So, but this time, I don't know why, I just feel good doing it. But often when I do a lot of your exercises, I tend to get in touch with the longing for a man, and I tend to feel the pain, and I don't mind like in feeling that, but it's very hard to go from that state and back to work. So when I do a lot of the exercises, like I get overwhelmed with all these old longing, sadness, oh, I miss, I feel alone, whatever. And yeah, I can be in the state, but then when I have to go and teach math the next day, like the shift between is very tough. And I get really confused. I don't know. It could be similar to my overload right now, overwhelming with the situation and everything. So it's probably a general thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see how I can say that best. So in general, right, a lot of the practices that connect us with the body and that connect us with our sensitivity to what's happening inside of us make it so that all sensations and emotions come up, right? And so some of those are really, really good and pleasure, like you said, it's very pleasurable and you feel connected with your body. But of course, the same set of practices also brings up either old unprocessed stuff or just simple yearning for things that are not there, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the yearning for things that are not there is kind of an ongoing thing. Even when you have something, you want it deeper or slightly different or more, you know. So that kind of, we could call it yearning, but we could also call it dissatisfaction, right? But so there's like a whole you know, kind of a grade between dissatisfaction and yearning. And so somewhere there we always sit with, you know, it's not the way we want it, to actually just the yearning for the depth, the real depth of connection. And so that's always there, we just don't always feel it, right? And so when we do these practices, often that's the first thing that pops up because it's not being felt. So on that scale from dissatisfaction to heart yearning, right, you'll sit somewhere and certain things can get us stuck in places. One of the things that can get us stuck in some part of that spectrum is old unresolved stuff or new unresolved stuff, right? Something that just happened. And that can be worked with in the realm of release, right? Working actively on letting things go, both via the body, but also, you know, writing things down, going to therapy, having a conversation with someone, all of those kind of things. So you have to kind of determine what of that is old stuff that you could wash out. And what of that is just the never to be quenched yearning for deeper union, right? And what of that is practical things you could actually tend to, right? Meaning where you could do something about it, right? So there are three different things to look at, you know, old stuff that you can get rid of, practical things that you could actually do, and the more, let's call it emotional, spiritual, devotional aspect of the yearning for deeper union or deeper longing, you know, for union. So that I think is what I would look at first, right? So that it's not all muddled together into this, in this kind of heaviness where then you feel like, you know, you're taken over by it. So, because if you even just get one of those three things somewhat handled, then it's not going to be so overwhelming. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, of course, that kind of full-bodied, full-hearted, not super cognitive place in one's body makes it so it's a bit harder to pull yourself together. Yeah. That's definitely true. So how I have to handle this for myself, and I'm sometimes very successful with it and sometimes not as successful, depending on how big the openness is also, is that when I have to go back from that open place where I'm like, just in a very different disposition to work, let's say, or a call or a session, then I do things that actually help me focus and somewhat contract into that space. So things like that would be for me list writing. Kind of I go, oh, it's all open and wonderful, and then I go, okay, I'm going to have to do a call in an hour. How am I going to get myself back? And what I usually do is I sit down, I look at my lists, I spell out the things I want to do either for the call or for the day. When I have time, when it's like when I write or something like that, I might sit and meditate, which really focuses my mind in a very specific way. I might clean some stuff up and straighten my environment so that order and structure returns in my body. And without being, too violent about it. And then I can go, okay, now I'm sharp again. Now I can do what needs to be done. So that's some things to consider.
It makes sense, because I was wondering right now, because I've been laughing about it for the last few weeks, thinking, how come I feel so sensitive without getting into that place? So right now I'm in a really good place, and I have much more, even though it's online, I've got much deeper connection with some of my female friends. So that deep connection equal out the longing in a way, because I got deep connection in a different way. That's very satisfying.
Yeah.
Even though it's Zoom. It's amazing how deep you can be with your friends on Zoom.
I know, it is quite interesting. We just finished late last night an Australian teacher training, and we did nonlinear with each other and everything. It was really quite satisfying. There was something very, very beautiful about that. So yeah, it can be done. But I just sort through the different things and see what's old junk, and what can be dealt with practically, and then enjoy the heart yearning.
Some days.
Some days, yes. Some days more than others, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It was very lovely seeing you. I'm gonna mute you, and April is next.
Hi, Michaela, nice to meet you.
Hello.
Okay, so I guess during the lockdown, I know it's been quite a period of sadness for a lot of people around the world. I feel like it's been a really nice opportunity for me to take things slower. So although I've still been working from home, I've actually found quite a lot of peace in being able to make a lot more time for myself. I know you talk about the go mode and the flowing more, and I feel like I've been able to exercise more, cook more, just find so much more of a balance just from working from home. And I guess for me, my anxiety comes from things going back to normal, whatever normal will be, and how I can hold on to that peace that I've found during this time. So I guess I know I've read your book, and I know you talk about rituals and exercises to encourage flow and things, but I guess this is a different time, because we're going to transition from this extraordinary time back to normal. How do you recommend, do you have any advice to help trying to hold on to those things that I said I've been able to make time?
It's interesting that you asked that, because that's really been the theme of everyone that we've moved everything online. So we've done our study groups and everything online, and a lot of people have said exactly that they've kind of realized that a lot of things that they've been doing, they enjoy not doing, and that they feel a certain kind of a stress of the requirement to up the schedule again and jump back into life and be out and about. And I think that's how shall I say that? I think that's a really good and valid concern, because there will be a strong move from everyone to just pretend like nothing's happened, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this the other day. I had my previous teaching partner died in an accident, and it was very shocking and very traumatic. And so for me, kind of life stopped for a moment, because there was the grief and also the technicalities of that.
Yeah.
And I needed a bit of, everything stopping, but it didn't, right? The river just kept on flowing, and everybody still needed all the things. And it was very, very unpleasant and jarring. And I think that's what's going to happen, is that
Yeah.
there will be a massive demand from the river, so to speak, to jump back in and paddle down as fast as humanly possible. And so the first thing there is to acknowledge that that's what's actually going to want to happen, and figure out what it is that you absolutely want to retain.
Okay.
Because, let's see how I can say this, because there was a break in the routine for everyone, right? Back then, there was only a break in my routine, and my life had drastically changed, but not anybody else's. But now everybody else's life has also drastically changed, some for the better, some for the worse.
Yeah.
You have a chance to re-engineer things, because we won't go back to normal, right? There will, as Gabriella was saying, there'll be all kinds of rules, and people are not going to want to do certain things. So what I would suggest you do is you kind of make a really solid list of the things you want to keep and the things you don't want to take back on. And then for the first couple of weeks of the reintegration, constantly check against that list. And you're going to have to do that. And that could be your morning ritual, is that you sit down with your list and you have this list. And then you look at your schedule and you really look at where are you being swept down the river, right? And can you get out of the river, so to speak, and sit on the banks and have your cup of tea before you do that. And that I would make the morning ritual, is that you carefully check every day, are you staying within the things that you absolutely wanted to? Because one of the things, of course, that we've now noticed in this moment is a lot of the things that we have habitually been doing are not that necessary.
No. And I guess I'm somebody that likes to give a lot, and then I end up giving a lot of my time to my work and to people, and in so many ways that then I'm empty myself, and then the things that I want to do, whether it's exercise or listen to podcasts or cook or just sit and enjoy things, then I sometimes then can't create that time, or I just don't have the energy because I've just like given so much. So I think the list will help. So yeah, thank you.
Good luck. Thank you. All right, so next up is Sarah. Here we go. Unmute you. Hello.
Hi, can you see?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hi, you look so fresh.
It's morning over here.
Yeah. So I already wrote an email about my question, that I'm going to repeat it now. Well, I'm stuck with those past resentments, and they're always coming up in the practices. And I want to loosen the grip there, that I want to be more tolerant to myself and to others too, but I'm just lost in the there.
Well, I'm going to elaborate on that a bit, because that might not make sense to people who don't know what you're talking about, right? So what you're talking about is that even though you do release practices and you have a somatic practice and you do nonlinear movement and you do the practices that we do in the study groups, and you were saying that in your email, particularly now in the pandemic, you notice that there is stuff that comes back up all the time and that doesn't actually resolve or release.
Yes.
And I've gotten another email from somebody saying something very, very similarly of old wounds having kind of broken open. And, you know, a lot of people have reported that some old traumas and some old relational stuff really came to the surface because of the extra stress and the extra, you know, also being on guard. The fight response in the nervous system makes it that you'll almost kind of look for previous precedent on potential injury, right? So you kind of go in a fight or flight situation, you go, where have I been hurt before? Oh, there. Is that what's happening again, right? So the brain and the body refers back to previous injury to see if you are in danger. And that can certainly happen, and that can certainly happen in the sense that stuff that still bothers you or that you still have resentment about. So one thing you might try, this might work, we'll have to see. This is an old, you know, an old therapy trick, is that you consider these kind of loops, you know, these things that come up and then they go away and then they come back up as useless information on your hard drive. You know, if we stick with the computer thing, right? And so on a computer, they have these so-called defragmentation programs, right? That you run and it cleans up old gunk and compresses everything. The mind has a bit of a function like this, where stuff that isn't stored in its proper place will randomly pop up to be dealt with. And often dreams deal with that. Right, and sometimes you can wash it out with nonlinear, but if it can't, then one of the ways that you can do it is you can offload it on an external hard drive, so to speak. And so how you do that is you, let's say you're still mad at an old girlfriend who did something horrible to you, right? And that pops up. And then when you were in the practice, that pops up and you have emotion about it and there's things you would like to say, then you sit down and you write a letter.
Okay.
Right, and you write a letter, and the first letter that you write is everything that you can think about. It's completely uncensored. And ideally, it's quite harsh. Right, so you write the letter that you would write if there's nothing you had to consider other than your own well-being. Right? And then you let that sit, and then the next day, or whenever it pops up the next time, you write another letter. Or maybe you'll say, I'm going to write 10 of them in a row, regardless of how I'm feeling. But you essentially read the letter, then add to it or write it freshly. It's good to keep the letters intact and not edit them on like a computer, because you want to have the written, you know, the outsourced piece there for you to maybe read later. So then write another one, write another one, write another one. And eventually what's going to happen is that things will move out of the unsaid, unspoken, unprocessed into the spoken, and with that, you know, kind of taken aside. And I've seen people have really good results with just really articulating it the way they haven't allowed themselves to articulate it, including some really nasty stuff.
Yeah, I can do nasty. Yeah.
So, you know, and then you might end up with a letter that is actually sendable or not. There's no obligation to ever share that stuff with someone. But for the sake of your exercise, you're going to pretend you would actually send it internally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Speaking directly to that person or situation, or, you know, whatever it is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Michaela, I have a question about the breath. and based on our women's group exercises. Somehow I got like, and it's has been persisting in the last couple of weeks, a kind of like, I don't even know how to characterize it, whether because I want to say renewed awareness of my breath or rather of the blockages, which I did not feel before. And I have done, let's say, the fair share of breathing exercise and this and that. And like a Russian saying, there is like, I thought I hit the rock bottom in terms of like, I thought I have done it until somebody knocked from below. And I'm like, and it kind of like, of course, it's not such a big problem, but it kind of drives me a little bit mad because I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like, maybe it's because of the exercises, additional again, but I've been like, I feel this, it's not like too strong. I know how bad it was, but it's still uncomfortable. I feel it with increased discomfort, like the tightness of the throat, of the diaphragm, of the lower belly, and of the breath, because I know how it feels, how the sensations are when it is like you know, all not clenched. But I'm like, what? So it could be of course the environment, could be many things, but maybe what I can do something about it, or maybe.
Well, here's something to consider, right? So your body, of course, has considerable sensitivity and awareness. You've worked on things for a long time. Your body is sensitive as is. You've done lots of practices, right? So whatever you are feeling is probably an accurate response of your body. But instead of feeling that that's not good enough or that you should be breathing deeper or more open, you could consider that that's your body giving you the limitations of what your body can do right now. Right? Because here are some things that you want to consider, one of which is you were actually sick, right? I don't know if you had the actual virus or if it was something else, but you couldn't breathe. You had, you know, you had lung issues. You had some actual physical stuff happen in the last month and a half. So there is a good chance that what you are feeling is the aftermath of having had some real issues with your lungs and your breathing, and that there's a little bit of trauma and stress and maybe still repair that has to happen before your body can open up. So I think your first line of defense is to go, well, I was sick and my body isn't totally recovered yet. And so instead of giving it a push or thinking it should be more open, I would use the practice and the breath practice specifically to feel it as a restorative, cleansing, nourishing kind of a situation where you know, kind of work with your body and your body's needs versus trying to get your body to do things that it's clearly not willing to do. That's what I would do, right?
I considered that approach. I was like, what the hell? Like, you should not be there. What is going on?
Yeah. Well, and you know, prolonged stress and prolonged, I mean, all of that would interrupt your breathing patterns and all of that. So I would just go, well, this is as far as my body wants to go, and use that particular practice to, because it's a cleansing breath anyway, right? And which is why I really would say, if you're working the way you're working with the breath and there's contractions and constrictions, be super, super gentle and take that as a roadmap as to where healing still needs to happen.
I just thought that as a result of those practices, I got into yet another, like I cleaned the layer, and for a while it was that awareness was there, and I thought it was okay. And I thought that I now went deeper, and I discovered the next layer of contraction, and then I was, yeah, it's it's, you know, like when I think about my whole life, that it's, if I was for 40 plus years, like in constant, I have never realized, but in constant, actually fight or flight, constant stress, constant striving, constant contraction, then perhaps I thought perhaps it's not very strange and I should not be like beating myself up that I am not yet dealt with this. Maybe
That's right. That's right. Right. That's another layer of the same thing, right? So you'll have to there, and then, you know, like the fight or flight and the contraction, and you have physical things that have to be, you know, dealt with. And in either which way, no, you shouldn't beat yourself up, because as human beings, there's always more, there's always deeper, there's always wider. You're never going to be done. So it's not one of those. Even people who have totally open breath will have fight or flight where the breath constricts, right? And even people who have totally open breath will get coughs and you know, whatever. It's not like your practice makes you immune to the nervous system doing its job.
Okay, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, well, I have several sort of burning questions, but you know, so we did this at the women's group, the first session, the Australia group, and there was a feeling that I had asked you about in the solar plexus region, and because it came up during the moving what you're feeling exercise, and which it often does, and it's a feeling that I've had that I struggled with for almost a year, and the past few months has been a little bit better, but it's hard to describe because it's not like physically painful, but it's a kind of rawness. It feels like a contraction, but it's also very tender. And oftentimes I would wake up in the morning with this feeling, and sometimes I would just be in bed for like hours in like a fetal position because somehow I couldn't move, you know. And in the evenings it would show up more as a feeling of like dread or just this inexplicable fear. And then I would do things kind of to either numb the feeling or distract myself. And you know, now it's so much, it's so helpful because now I can at least move it so that I'm not in this contracted position and I'm not just doing things just to avoid it. But the way you had explained, you know, and it often, I felt that it was somehow related to some of the spiritual explorations that I was doing, you know, because I mentioned now several times that I was very intensely focused on this non-dual approach. And so I bring it to my non-dual teacher, and that approach, I mean, I would like to ask about that too, but perhaps later. The way you explained it was very simple and very matter of fact. You know, I felt like you understood what I was talking about when often I don't get that response. And you had a very simple solution for it, you know, which was to move it. But I could also tell that there were some things that were kind of, that I didn't retain from that conversation. I felt like maybe there was something more to be said about it. So I wanted to first ask about if there was any more information, like anything else that you could kind of tell me about what's going on there.
Yes and no. So here's the thing to in general for everyone, right? When you engage in practices that connect you with your body, or connect you with your body mind, let's put it this way, right? So, and this could be moving what you're feeling, which is what you're doing, but it could also be a meditation and body meditations and things like that. Then what happens is the system gets sensitized. So meaning you're picking up more of what's in there. And the thing to understand here is that those things are always there. We don't always feel them. Right? And that particular sensation of, you know, whatever you called it, that rawness or whatever, is a bit like the opening of the heart, the way you describe it, right? It's actually, it's not a bad thing, but it can feel very raw and vulnerable and disconcerting because you're feeling so much, right? And so in the feeling so much, a lot of people then shut it back down because it's just too much. And so the important piece there is, like we were talking, is you know, that you kind of move it, but also that you just relax, so that you feel where in the body that makes you want to clench, and then you know, open that up. So that's where I would go at it.
So kind of reverse the maybe habitual inclination to contract around the feeling, but instead.
Yes, you do that with moving it, but you can train awareness around what happens somatically by noticing when it happens and where it happens. So eventually what's going to happen is you can feel when that thing is going to happen before it actually happens. And then you can go, oh, it's connected to this, or it's connected with something I'm feeling, or it's connected to a certain kind of set of circumstances that allow, you know, that allow that to happen. And when that happens, then you can go, oh, here it is, right? And then you immediately start moving with it or relaxing it. So you could look at it like it's a bit like a trigger practice, where you figure out where you get triggered and how to, you know, dissolve the trigger. But you could also just assume that those things always happen, and that having feelings isn't bad. Right? We're not robots. We're not you know, just happy people where everything is always all one. That's not the human experience. One might aspire to such state, but that's not actually that practical. Or also, why would you want to live, right? So you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to feel love very deeply, and you're going to get very hurt. And you're going to get very angry, and then you're going to get very happy. So as a matter of fact, when you start sensitizing to sensations, you'll notice that you have a lot more range, you know. And of course, you can only go this as high as you can go low. So if you are really, really ecstatic, you're also going to be able to go really down. Yeah.
So it's not important to understand like what this is from or why this is there, like that kind of stuff. Okay, because I also didn't want to kind of spiritualize this feeling when it's perhaps maybe some just some emotional, you know, trauma that I'm not looking at or something.
It might, but it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, sometimes it's important that we understand what drives us. That's what therapy is for, right? And if you have traumatic incidents in your past, it's always good to know what they do to you. But also, not everything that arises in the body has to be talked to death, examined, and medicated, right? Okay. There's just stuff happening all the time. You know? I don't know if you've ever had that, but I've had moments where nature was so beautiful that I could almost not bear it, because it opened my body and my heart so much that it was almost unpleasant, right? And then you have to kind of just relax with that, or you'll notice how you shut it down. Same's true with pleasure. A lot of people have pleasure thresholds. We'll get there in the pleasure course as well, right? Where you just can only get that far, and then you down regulate. So not everything's an issue, not everything's a pathology, and not everything needs to be understood. If it's something that somatically can be worked with, you can just work with it regardless of the origin or cause.
I do have another question that is perhaps a bit theoretical, but I feel like you guys are the only ones who I know who can answer it. And you know, it has a little bit to do with the non-dual thing, where, because when I would bring it to my teacher, that his approach would be more like, well, you can see the feeling, you know, so it cannot be you, you know, meaning see clearly that it's a bodily sensation, and then be the awareness that is observing that, you know, be the space in which the feeling appears. And I really tried this, you know, for a good year, and the whole thing was like not to try to make it go away, not to really get involved with it. And so every time when it would get more, it seemed to be getting more intense, I would feel like, okay, I must be doing it wrong, and I'm still invested in somehow getting rid of it, so maybe it's not working. Anyway, and it wasn't until I met this woman who kind of showed me really that the way to dissolve it is to go through it, you know, and she was the one who encouraged me to look into movement, and that's how somehow I found this. But, you know, so for me, and I don't want to make it like the non-dual teachings are wrong. They were so, you know, helpful for me at some point, but it got to the point where it felt very much like it required a detachment that was almost like a dissociation. You know, it felt like a dissociation that was not working for me. And so I don't know if, you know, it was just that it was not the right approach for me, or, you know, if there was some kind of spiritual, it almost seemed like it was encouraging a kind of spiritual bypass. And I mean, I'm bringing it to you guys because I know you guys are doing some the science and non-duality stuff, and more and more I see in the non-dual circle teachers from kind of the Kashmir Shaivism tradition pop up. And are these like two approaches that are meant to kind of complement each other? Like, are they just different approaches leading to the same thing? Or it seems like theoretically they should kind of meet somewhere, but in practice, I just feel like they don't quite. It's like the divine feminine and the divine masculine not somehow being able to meet somewhere. That's helpful. So anyway, I know that's not a very practical question, but if you have anything to say on that.
Sometimes you know, I get very confused with some of the stuff that's out there as well. So because there's just so many different ways of slicing it, and some of them appeal more to me than others, right? Clearly. But I always look at it as an altitude thing, right? So different things look very different from different altitudes. And I find that a lot of people who do who is talking and, you know, and all of that are like way up there somewhere looking down. Yeah, if you go high enough and you look down on the planet, everything looks like an ant and unimportant and, you know, ants are moving. Why are ants moving? You know, they're going somewhere. And so when you kind of go high enough, all of that makes perfect sense. When you're the ant trying to drag a gigantic spider into your anthill, you have a different concern than, you know, the human who looks at you from very, very high up. So, you know, some of these things will not line up or really make sense because from different altitudes, they look very different. And from inside the body and from having a deeply human experience, things also look very different than when you're kind of going, well, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. But you could also say, I'm a human being having also a spiritual experience. And, you know, people always say these things. And when you look from wherever you look, it looks very, very different. And those things might never really meet. And then when they don't meet, you have to find the razor's edge of how do you reconcile seemingly opposing views and ideas. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll make this also available as a recording in the next couple of days, and we'll announce another call. Other than that, the other things to say is Pleasure Body is still open. It's for men and women. And then we put out some resources, one called the Embody Toolkit and one the Intimacy Toolkit, with our kind of best tried and true practices in both of those. So, and we've put them on sale so that even people who are stuck at home without work can do them. So for the time being, they have a pandemic pricing, even though we don't call it that. And I think that's all I have to say for right now. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll do this again soon.